Okay, this is the next and probably the final installment on the French door project. Um, what I've done is I have primed and painted the wall, and I should mention I also sanded it after the application of the skim coat. And I should say that I dry sanded my skim coat, or my third coat, and according to the instructions, sanding could be done either with wet sanding. It says try wet sanding with a sponge, but you can also use dry sanding. I just used dry sanding. I didn't really know or hadn't done this wet sanding before, and it seems as though either one of them should work fine. Now, I should say probably it will affect the texture. If you dry sand, I believe you'll end up with a flatter, potentially a flatter texture if you, depending on the grit of the sandpaper and if you sand out all the imperfections. Okay, the wet sanding, I believe, will have a certain amount of roughness in it. Now, the issue here is, I don't know if you're even going to be able to see this, but one issue with here will be, I put in new wallboard, but then there was existing wallboard, so there's going to be a texture mismatch because I did this dry sanding, and the question is, well, how were the original walls finished? Well, they probably didn't use dry sanding. If you look at it very close, you can notice there's a certain amount of what you call texture, but not very much. On my section, there's less. What you more or less see are brush strokes. This is just one coat of primer and one top coat. Normally I would put on two top coats because one top coat is not going to completely cover. Okay, there's going to be little spots where you'll miss, or the brush is a little bit like here. You can see a teeny bit of show through. See that? A little bit lighter on there. Okay. But I didn't put a second coat on here because my wife said she might want to just paint this all a different color anyway. Okay, but just so that until that point in time comes, I just put on one coat of this yellow paint because we had the yellow paint. I got nothing else I'm going to do with it anyway. I should also say that I did have a problem with the blistering of the tape, and I'm focusing on it right here. The section that I cut out and then patched again has a slightly different, it's not the texture, it's mostly the color. It had a different color, and with the one coat of primer and one top coat, you can still see the slight color variation where I put a patch in, okay? They say that blistering could be due to probably two reasons. One is the drywall mud was too dry, so it didn't adhere, or you squeezed it out to be too thin. I'm gonna guess mine, it might have just been too dry here because this was the last section I did, but I had a problem there, and I also had a problem over on this section here where I had to cut out. I had a little blistering, and that was a little bit responsible for some of why it didn't look quite right down here. You can kind of see here also where I cut it out. Now this is actually going to end up being behind probably a heating thing here, or if it's got baseboard, it wouldn't go that high, so that would still show. But I cut that out, and that ends up being now flat. And the same issue over here. I put a skim coat over this drywall. There's a slight change in the texture. You can kind of see it if you see light coming across it. Okay. Now, this wall, because it faces east, is not subjected to a low angle of sun coming in, okay? And you probably will never get what they call harsh lighting on these walls. You only get the lighting that's coming from inside, which is not so bright and at a low angle to produce that type of shadowing. You can see a little bit of it there, maybe, but there you go. Once you get it in, you might see a different in texture. But anyway, it's very minor. Another thing I wanted to mention was, I did notice, I haven't put the trim on yet, and I'll probably end up caulking this gap simply because I can. And it's already got the spray foam down behind it between the framing and the door. But what I wanted to point out here was, you can see the door, it's proud of the wall here, but at the very bottom, it actually is slightly shy on this side, but not on the other side. On this side, it isn't. Now, when I use the level, what I find over here is the door is straight, it's plumb. It's the wall that's slightly tilted here, okay? The door actually seems to be fine. It's just the original wall, I guess, wasn't quite vertical, apparently, in this area. The operation of the door is fine, so when I put the trim on, that'll be a slight problem. I did end up putting back on the marks that I had on the floor to show me where the original double stud of the double hung window was, just so that I know that in the future. It's not so important there. Where I really wanted to do it was over here, where I marked out where the 4-inch PVC drain waste vent stack is, because I don't want to be drilling any holes in here, this wall. And also the hydronic heating pipe runs up this wall too. And I don't want to do the same thing that I did before. I don't want to drill a hole in my vent and end up ruining the wall, okay? Minor point. But nobody would want to do that twice. Okay, so that's just a little wrap up on some of the details of finishing this wall. And that's all for this project. Thanks.